Hello, everyone. This is Kit Cabell with Hard Lens Media. As we all have seen recently within these past months, climate change and environmental disasters are becoming more frequent as we continue to push forward into the next year. And the sad fact is, all of this could have been avoided, but unfortunately, with the influence of the fossil fuel industry in our United States Congress, it's quite clear that these disasters, these pipeline spills, these oil spills are going to keep on happening over and over again. But we need real accountability. Sadly, corporate media won't do it. And those who are fighting truth to power, those who are representing the people, such as Stephen Donziger, who's still under house arrest at 2 years now and counting, we're losing allies, we're losing people. And sadly, we need more people in the fight. And I'm proud to introduce a returning guest to the show who's been one of the leading figures on covering the Colonial Pipeline spill in North Carolina. I want to give it up for Robbie Jaeger, who's also with the Mi Casa Su Casa network. Robbie, for a quick recap for our viewing audience, I think it's very important that we start from the beginning with the Colonial Pipeline spill. And the last time we had you on our show, the evidence was still building up about how this pipeline could potentially be one of the worst ecological disasters in American history. So let's start from the beginning. How did this all happen? And then let's start with an update. Of course, I'll be citing some excerpts from your article, but I think it's very important that you also give us some further updated information as well. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure thing. So first off, thanks guys for having me back on again to even talk about this, because this story has gone vastly underreported. So just appreciate that. But yeah, I think the last time we talked, we were waiting on new estimates, right? Well, let's just flash back all the way to the beginning. Where did this all start? It's been nearly a year now. August 14th of 2020, two teenagers riding through the Oler Nature Preserve outside of Huntersville, North Carolina. It's a rural community. They smelled gasoline while they were riding through riding through the park on their ATVs. They reported it to authorities. Turns out the Colonial Pipeline system that runs through that nature preserve had been leaking for what turned out to be a possible time frame of weeks or maybe even months undetected, and would have continued to go undetected had these kids not found it. Colonial fixed the leak within a few days of actually discovering it, but the damage was already done. Their first analysis of the spill, their first reports of how much it was 60,000 gallons. That was in the initial report in September. They turn around in November of 2020 and they say, no, it was actually closer to 272,000 gallons. Then in January, after the state regulators decided that there was lots of discrepancies in the reporting that Colonial was bringing in, they decided to ask them for new estimates, and Colonial gave new estimates in January of this year, except it went from 272,000 gallons of gasoline to 1.2 million gallons of gasoline, which was an astounding leap. But so we go on, the investigation continues, and it's continuing at a snail's pace throughout most of this year, until a couple of months ago, Colonial Pipeline admits openly that they really don't know how much gasoline spilled into that nature preserve, and that, in fact, they fully expect the number to go far above the 1.2 million gallon number that they gave us back in January. And as a matter of fact, they actually put out a statement earlier this week, or last week, should I say, that said that they expected to cross that threshold anytime over the weekend. And so we can assume now that we have officially crossed that threshold. So all of this being said, right, for some context, Kit, just to let you know, the largest recorded pipeline spill on U.S. soil came in 1991, and it was in Minnesota. It was 1.68 million gallons, right? This Colonial Pipeline spill, which, as I said, Colonial has admitted that it's far deeper into the soil than they initially thought, and they have no idea. How much even spilled. And actually, to start there, this basically brings us quickly up to speed where we are now. You know, we're on the precipice of a historic pipeline spill here, and you know, while we're waiting on the new estimates, they decide to ask for Colonial decides to ask the state regulators for an indefinite extension on those estimates, because they say in order for them to get those numbers, they would have to stop all cleanup activities, which are still ongoing for the foreseeable future, they would have to shut down those activities for possibly weeks in order to get an estimate, which by their own admission, given the technology they have, may not even be accurate. So as far as the question of, are we ever going to get an actual estimate of how much gasoline spilled into the soil? The answer is probably never. And even if we do get those estimates, both Colonial and a third-party engineering firm have come out and said that the methods that they would have to use to get those estimates uh, are open to interpretation. That's a quote, and that the accuracy basically is shotgun. It's it's spread out. It's scattershot. Basically, is what I'm trying to say. So I mean, we may not ever actually get an answer. Well, we will get an answer. We're just going to have to wait years and years for it because Colonial Pipeline has to file monthly reports that basically brings us up to speed on how much gas they've recovered from the ground from the date of the incident until now. At the end of June, they had just gotten to like 1.1 some million gallons. So it makes sense that we're crossing that 1.2 million gallon threshold this month. Who knows? A couple of years from now, there's no telling how much gasoline they'll have pumped out of the nature preserve. But this isn't even the worst part of it all. And I know that I've laid down some pretty depressing stuff here.
Right.
But
No,
did you? Yeah, go ahead. No, I was just gonna say, yeah, go ahead. What's
well,
up?
because the thing is, like, it's so far. What I think a lot of our viewing audience is still wondering is, where's the rest of the press at? Where are all the other people talking about? I know we've brought it up here at Hardlands Media.
Right.
I know Mikatsu Kasa has brought it up, and I want you to continue on. But I think, again, what is growing, again, a spill, and let's face it, pipelines always leak at this point. They're not reliable. They're built on the cheap. You have even asked it on social media. Where's the rest of the press at? So please continue on with the rest of your statement, but then please follow up with, where's the rest of the press? There's a lot of people quiet about what is the largest ecological disaster in American history.
Well, right. And so I think this is a great juncture to ask that question, though. I mean, we brought it up to a certain point to where now we know what kind of spill we're dealing with here. This isn't just some little drop in a bucket. This is something of historic proportions, possibly the largest ever when all is said and done. So you would think naturally that this would be all over the news, right? You would think naturally that environmental organizations such as Sunrise Movement and several other 350, Greenpeace, anybody really would be shouting about this, ranting and raving about this. You would think that progressive politicians who run on a platform of Green New Deal or just environmentalism in general, they'd be all over a pipeline spill, especially one that's majority is owned by the Koch Industries. This is something that you would expect to be all over the news, but it hasn't been. It hasn't been at all. I mean, like I said, you did a good job. You guys have been a godsend. Everybody that I've been working with on the indie circuit, people that have actually been covering it, deserve a lot of credit because the people that should be covering it are not covering it for whatever reason. And we've literally begged people to at least, if you're not going to read my work, there's a wonderful reporter by the name of Lisa Sorg who works for NC Policy Watch. She's been doing amazing reporting on this as well. She's the only other person now that I've seen recent reporting on this incident. She's the only other person I would recommend other than myself to go to for information. And I'm sure we'll get to that here in just a couple of minutes once we get all the way up to speed. But yeah, it's been a really disappointing experience though, kid. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I've been in contact with several local chapters of Sunrise Movement that asked me for a lot of information on this. I gave them everything I had, despite my skepticism. I never heard anything back. I spoke to candidates for U.S. Senate that are running on the Green New Deal here in North Carolina that couldn't make time to talk about it and haven't yet to say anything publicly about it, even though, it has been brought to their attention. And again, the reason I can't figure out a real reason why media won't cover it. Is it because it's in North Carolina in a rural community? Is it because they got lucky and didn't contaminate any drinking water? Is it because there's no indigenous land dispute going on there? I can't pin it down. But regardless, it's just been a very disappointing experience, and it's had ramifications. As you know, I'll get to right now. This is where we're at now. This is the part that gets me really worked up about this, because just last week or secretly they just reported it on July 4th. It was so funny. They released this information literally the night of July 4th, or the morning after. Just quietly uploaded this document to their website. The federal regulators did this. Uploaded this document to their website. No press release, no nothing. And the document was basically saying that we've entered into a settlement with Colonial Pipeline regarding this spill, and not only this spill but other spills. That, by the way, federal regulators themselves not only blamed on Colonial's inadequate inspection methods and lackluster leak detection technology, that they also said made those spills worse, but federal regulators also condemned this entire pipeline just back in March, saying the entirety of it, all 5,500 miles of Colonial Pipeline, is a risk to public safety and environmental safety as it stands right now. So, knowing all of this, federal regulators went behind closed doors with Colonial Pipeline and their attorneys and worked out a settlement that allows Colonial Pipeline to not have to admit guilt or fault in any of this, right? It also protects them from any kind of litigation or further litigation with the United States government, meaning the Department of Justice Environmental Crimes Division won't ever see this case. The Attorney General will never see this case, because this settlement basically just says, hey, we're going to give you a laundry list of things about your leak detection technology and a laundry list of things about your pipeline inspection methods and stuff like that you have to change within a certain amount of time. No fine, no no reprimand. This isn't going to go to court. And again, Colonial, by the letter of the document, by the letter of the settlement, they don't have to admit fault to anything, and the federal agency isn't actually technically accusing them of breaking any law or violation per the terms of the settlement. So, while there has been reported, the individuals in the community can still sue Colonial Pipeline, sure, but because of what the government just did, Colonial is going to wave that paper back and forth and say, hey, well, the government didn't say anything about what happened here. And it's just going to make it that much harder for anybody that actually wanted to pursue something like that, even harder than it was already going to be.
Wow.
Now there is language in the contract in the settlement that says that should Colonial Pipeline not comply with the terms of the settlement that they brokered, by the way. So keep that in mind. If they should not comply with the terms of the settlement, then they will be subject to penalties such as $200,000 per day per violation, as assessed by the federal agency. But and this is where the quick discussion we had about media kind of plays back into it now, is because, for one thing, the lack of coverage before the settlement, the lack of pressure from activists and, any kind of attention whatsoever made it really easy for the government to just handle this behind closed doors when nobody's paying attention, because nobody cares, right? There's no pressure for them to do anything different, and the government never does anything without pressure. And we all know that pressure is caused by activists, which is fueled by the media, covering important issues that matter to people that want to change them. And that none of that happened, right? None of that happened with this. So it was really easy for the government to just do nothing. And that's exactly what they did. But now we have the settlement, which has gotten a little bit of coverage, especially from a lot of the local news stations. And I mean local to the area, Charlotte, North Carolina, and a lot of the surrounding area. But they've been getting it all wrong. And it's baffling to me, because now they're saying, most headlines are saying that Colonial Pipeline is facing huge daily fine in connection with North Carolina spill. And that's simply just not the case. They were not punished by any fine for the spill. There won't be any fine assessed for that spill. The only way a fine is assessed is if they don't comply with the terms of the settlement, which, let's just be honest about things, is that, again, they went behind closed doors, went through great lengths to keep this thing quiet, went behind closed doors, had a private meeting with federal regulators, and worked out the own terms to their own settlement. Somebody please explain to me why they wouldn't abide by the terms. They just got out scot-free on everything. I
And
mean,
and that's an
it
interesting.
just doesn't make any sense why they would have to pay. So, I mean, I just feel like people are going to see those headlines and feel like there's some measure of justice was served. And it's just simply not the case. They're never going to pay a dime, and they're just going to, they're going to play the bureaucracy game and get away with this scot free.
Yeah, and see, and that's something that needs to be brought up because it wasn't too long ago that Colonial Pipeline was attached to another story where there was that hacking situation where the pipeline was quote unquote shut down due to the intervention of hackers, and that got a lot of attention. And what I think a lot of our viewers don't know is the absolute length of the Colonial Pipeline, going from the Gulf all the way up to, I believe, New York State. Correct me if I'm wrong, or does it
New
go up
York
further?
State, New Jersey, yes, right
New
up.
York,
Yeah.
New State, New Jersey. Thank you so much for that input. But again, you mentioned before, and let's again go right back to the beginning. Two kids on ATVs, enjoying their day. It wasn't investigators. It wasn't any state regulators. It wasn't any kind of federal regulators or environmentalists or activists or just anybody with authority. Two random civilians found this horrifying spill. And what I think what a lot of people need to question now is, well, the strength and durability of that pipeline in other states. What other spills are being ignored? And what I want to ask is, because of this deal that was made behind closed doors, again, the Federal Regulation Group, the Pipeline Hazardous Material Administration, also PHMSA for short acronyms, as you put in your article. Again, everyone check out Robbie Jaeger's Substack. Does that agreement also cover any kind of future spills that would happen in any other state? Can you at least give us some information about that? Should there be another spill from Colonial Pipeline found in another state?
Now, I didn't see any language in the settlement that would protect them going forward for
Right.
anything that hasn't happened yet, right? But what it does do is it gives them liability. And this was a baffling thing about it, too, is that PIMSA decided to not only kind of waive Colonial's liability for the Huntersville spill, but for other random, really bad spills, maybe not quite on the same level, but for other bad spills that Colonial was guilty of in the past, by including them in the settlement. Which means now that, I mean, obviously, the time period for lawsuits for those older spills have probably come and gone. But regardless of that, Colonial can still hold this up later on down the road and say, hey, we did nothing wrong. Nobody ever found anything. It's just going to get completely washed away by history here. So, and again, you mentioned the durability of this pipeline. I have to reiterate, PIMSA, that's how I use that. That's how I say the acronym for the federal agency, the Pipeline and Hazardous Material Safety Administration. PIMSA themselves, just this year, they didn't basically they said that Colonial Pipeline, as constructed, poses a threat to the public and environment throughout this entire system, and that the potential for a leak like the one that happened in Huntersville is present throughout, which means that it could be happening literally right now. And I mean, here's the thing. I know that the part about the kids on the ATVs might sound like just icing on the cake for how abysmal this story is, but it's actually a huge part of it, because had they not drove through there, it could still be leaking. Colonial was the point being is that Colonial was never going to find that leak without some kind of third-party help, because
Right.
their technology would have never detected it because it was so small and leaking at such a small rate. That's why they suspect this leak was going on for so long, because and look, Colonial Pipeline, as I said, has to file with state regulators every month a monthly report that basically brings us up to speed on how much they've pulled out of the ground since the day it happened. And that's how we're tracking totals now. As I said earlier, we're never going to get an actual estimate. And even if we do, it won't be accurate. So we have to just kind of move on from that, right? They're
My
not going to
goodness.
predict for us. So the only way we're going to be able to really see how big this spill is to ride out these monthly reports all the way until the end when the government decides that they don't have to file them anymore, which could be years from now. Who knows, at the rate these things move. And so look, that's in the long run, that's when we'll find out how big the spill actually was, is years from now, when that last report comes in and we can finally see. Yeah, it's been a really not gonna lie, it's been a really really depressing experience covering this story, because it's like you're screaming into the void, right? You've got the people that are obviously trying to help you, like you guys and Jimmy and a lot of other people that amplified the story, and we were really grateful. But it was just the people who could have really, you would expect to just care about something like this
You would
that
expect
totally
more
ignored it.
allies joining in the fight. And
Yeah, and we
And I
yeah.
think it's also very important to point out that, again, the length of the Colonial Pipeline and how much ground it covers here in our country. How many times have we reported, or any other independent media network has reported, or even in rare cases, even corporate media, about a pipeline spill happening in the United States? We could mention the Dakota Access Pipeline. We could also mention Line 3, but there are numerous other examples that we can mention happening here in this country. And it is a serious problem because, again, these pipelines are built on the cheap. They do fail. And the thing is, while we can sound conspiratorial by saying, oh, there is a pipeline leak, how many times have we seen throughout this last decade of pipeline spills happening over and over again? And for our viewing audience, here's just a short excerpt from Robbie Jaeger's article on Substack, and I urge everyone to read it in its full entirety. But here is the agreement behind closed doors, and I'll read it aloud. This agreement does not constitute a finding of violation of any federal law or regulation and may not be used in any civil proceeding of any kind as evidence or proof of any fact, fault, or liability as evidence of violation of any law, rule, regulation, or requirement except in a proceeding to enforce the provisions of this agreement or in future. Again, Pipeline Hazardous Material Administration Enforcement Agreement. Again, actions of Colonial Pipeline neither admits nor denies any allegation or conclusion in the notice of this agreement and order, but agrees for purposes of this agreement and order to address the alleged risk condition by completing the terms of this agreement. So what this means for everyone that's watching this right now, what this means for everyone that's hearing this right now, and or when you choose to read Robbie Jaeger's article in its full entirety, is this. Number one, it's going to happen again, and they're going to find a way to weasel their way out of it, because pipelines spill and because of the influence of money in politics, our politicians will turn a blind eye to it. So going forward, I think what a lot of people want to know is there any kind of justice that's going to be done, or is this over and done with, and are we just screaming into the void like you said? Because, again, pipelines always break. They always spill.
Well, here's my take on this. What PEMSA did has nothing to do with what state regulators could potentially do.
Okay.
Their investigation is ongoing and is independent. They were cooperating. They were working together, but also with two independent investigations. There could be something coming down, but even if there does, it's no way it's going to be able to be on the same kind of level as what could have been from PEMSA. PEMSA could have leveled a $250 million fine on Colonial Pipeline had they decided to. And here's the thing, man, and this is where I'm going to get on my soapbox just for a minute.
Go ahead.
Because quite honestly, is this over federally? On the federal level, this is over. This is pretty much it, right? And as I said before, the reason that it got to be able to even get swept under the rug the way it was because nobody paid attention. Nobody cared about this story, even though people like us tried to just get them to understand this is a spill of historic proportions. And they ignored the story by and large. They just, for some reason, wouldn't talk about it. I am 110% behind the DAPL protests. Same for the Line 3 protests. But the question has to be asked, why isn't the Colonial Pipeline actively spilling into the earth, not getting the same amount of anger or coverage or outrage or activism or attention. I just don't understand that. It's been a tragedy of failures, from the journalists to activists to politicians. Nobody, none of the Green New Deal progressives, no, Bill McKibben was the closest that we came to getting any major environmental activists. My colleague Misty Winston reached out to him on Twitter, linking him to one of my stories. He told her that he would try to squeeze that in to his column in The Nation that week, which he did. And it amounted to, bad thing happened. It was bad. It was literally as long as the tweet he sent Misty, which to me, I feel like it deserves a little bit more than that. This could be the largest pipeline spill in American history, right? Not just it already is of the last 20 some odd years, but it could be the largest in history. And I feel like it deserves more than just a blurb at the bottom of a newsletter. And, there was no pressure. There was no pressure on PIMSA to do what they could have done. There could have been some kind of change come out of this kit. We could have gotten some actual, much needed discussion of pipeline industry reform, because as you said, pipelines always leak. They're built on the cheap. The one we're talking about now in Colonial was built in the 60s. The majority of it is being held together by Bondo in a lot of places, it seems like, and it could be leaking into the Mississippi River right now, and they could never know about it until, maybe somebody drinks it. But like, again, $200,000 a day per violation, they could have done that from the start. They could say, we're going to violate you 4 violations per day, every day since the beginning of the spill. That would amount to almost a $250 million fine. And you know what that's going to do? That's going to send a message to the rest of the industry. You're going to hold Colonial Pipeline up in front of all of their contemporaries in the pipeline industry, and you're going to tell everybody in the country that runs a pipeline, if you want to do business in this country as a pipeline company, you're going to have to do better than them. Because if you do business the way they've done business, this is what's going to happen to you, right?
Wow.
And they could have sent that message, because you know what? Not every pipeline company, a few are, such as Enbridge and TC, but a lot of these pipelines that we have in the country are actually smaller owned, and they can't afford a $250 million fine. And that's going to make them take notice. Like, we better get our P's and Q's in order, or we're going to have a really tough time being in business. Or here's a thought: say, hey, if you guys can't do better, we're not just going to fine you, we're going to revoke your business license. I mean, in any other profession that you would have to have a license to do, practice law, practice medicine, you screw up enough times, they're going to take your license away. So tell me why Colonial Pipeline gets to have, dozens of incidents over the last 3 years. Just in the last 3 years, dozens of incidents, minor incidents reported to PIMSA. Over the last decade, they've had over 272 pipeline spills. Over the last 20 years, I said decade, I meant over the last 2 decades, over 270 pipeline spills in the last 20 years. If I was a lawyer and I had 272 cases of, breaking of infractions against my code of ethics, or just all around malpractice, I wouldn't be allowed to practice law anymore. And I don't believe that, why is it that Colonial Pipeline is allowed to practice the industry, their business? There were so many things that we could have gotten out of this, that just didn't materialize because there was no pressure for it to materialize. I feel like that's a large part of it, and I could be wrong, and I'm sure look, there's lots of other factors to it. Colonial Pipeline is inherently powerful. We saw what happened whenever they got hacked and they shut down. We see why they won't just shut down, because of the huge gas shortage that was in the Southeast. 45% of the East Coast fuel flows through that thing. And as soon as they asked the federal government for help, they came running at their beck and call. And it's been more of the same. It's like I said, it's been a sad situation here. And for all intents and purposes, Colonial got away with it, unfortunately.
Well, hold on. Let's actually just take a step back and really look at the bigger picture. Now, to your point, you are right. A lot of people who could have done something chose not to. And I personally feel that this story with Colonial Pipeline isn't over yet because this spill is historic. The fact that 2 kids found this and no one else did is a very terrifying situation because it probably was spilling on much longer than all of us knew. As we have said before and as we have covered, as well as numerous other channels have covered, pipelines do break. They do spill. This is a fact. There's no debate about it. But when people do look back, when people finally realize the danger that we are in, especially with how Colonial Pipeline has gotten away with it, they'll point to you, Robbie Jaeger, as someone who is leading the way, as the journalist should, bring awareness. And here's hoping that it won't be too little too late when people start asking you what happened, how can we stop this, because you have the story and you need to keep on reporting this, and you cannot lose motivation on continuing to shine a light on this historic disaster. And the sad fact is that this story isn't over, but again, with a lot of people being silent, with Steven Donziger still under house arrest, we have people like yourself, Robbie Jaeger, who are actually speaking truth to power and fighting that good fight. So with that being said, with a final question for our viewers and subscribers, where can they find you online and social media so they could support your work and continue following what you are reporting on with this pipeline spill?
So for your viewers, if you want to check out my Substack, it is jaeger.substack.com. This my campaign finance newsletter that I publish weekly covers all of the major campaign finance stories, deep dives into dark money, all of your government stock trades from the executive branch and House and Senate. You can follow me on Rockfin at Rob Littlefire. Twitter is the same name. I do a lot of breaking news on there. And before I get out of here, guys, like I always like to say before I leave the program, if any of your viewers have something to do later on after you're done watching this video, I encourage you to read up on some kind of literature just to educate yourself a little bit more about autism, and so we can maybe help build a more educated, inclusive, and accessible world to our neurodiverse brothers and sisters out there. But other than that, Kit, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on again, and thank you for amplifying this really important story. It's very appreciated.
Well, Robbie Jaeger, again, journalist, reporter with the Mikasa Tsukasa Network, one of the few heroes that is actually covering this historic spill. Keep on speaking truth to power. The story about Colonial Pipeline, sadly, is not over yet, but we will gladly keep in contact with Robbie Jaeger and have him back on the show again because, again, it's not over yet, and the sad fact is that there are going to be future pipeline spills. We got to fight for that better future. Robbie Jaeger, thank you so much for being on our show. Keep on doing the good work. My name is Kit Cabell, the host of Hardlens Media. Peace to you guys, and let us all do what we can to build a better future. Take care.